The Valari command vessel, Varax Tau, slid into the shadows beyond Neptune's orbit like a ghost, invisible to any primitive sensors Earth might possess. Its surface shimmered with adaptive alloys that reflected not just light, but intention, a ship designed to erase itself from curiosity. Inside, silence ruled. No voices, no footsteps. The Valari communicated in pulses of mindlight, direct and precise, shared through neural relay chambers where words were too slow and emotions too unstable. Admiral Sarun stood alone at the forward observation deck, a space designed more for ritual than function. Through a transparent veil of dark matter glass, Earth appeared as a distant blue spheroworld turning quietly in the black. His dorsal fins adjusted slightly as he reviewed the classification data. Category 3, primitive, planetary development stable. No unifying planetary authority. Tribal segmentation, local conflicts. Fossil fuel remnants still in use. Orbital capacity limited. Nuclear potential present but contained. Low threat designation. A thought techo from the fleet's central cognition. Note interrupted his review. Scan complete. Data integrity confirmed. Behavioral baselines collected. Sarun responded with a slow mental pulse. Approval, proceed. All across the ship. Compartments came alive with silent activity. Bioneural. Archivists processed visual and thermal patterns from Earth's surface. Social matrices were analyzed in moments. Every open network, every unencrypted transmission, every facial expression caught on camera was filtered and mapped to emotional signatures. The planet's history unfurled in simulation. Wars, uprisings, innovations, treaties, betrayals. The fleet's behavioral analyst, a pale figure coiled in a vat of clear gel, compiled its summary and projected it into the minds of the senior command. Species is volatile but fragmented. Collective risk to hegemony forces is minimal. Civilian. Population is unprepared for orbital incursion. Military capability relies heavily on physical infrastructure. Weakness, emotional inconsistency. Strength, high adaptability. Recommendation, initiate contact phase and proceed to suppression within 6 planetary cycles. A whisper of consensus rippled through the command structure. Routine, expected. But Sarun hesitated. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if seeing deeper into the blue world far below. Something in the summary felt ... incomplete. The data was correct. The numbers were correct. But the shape of the pattern was wrong. Highlight psychological anomalies, he ordered. The archivists obeyed. New streams of images flowed across the command sphere. Human soldiers shielding children with their bodies. Firefighters wading into floods. Medical teams working through plagues without pause. Protesters standing in front of armored vehicles. Without weapons, survivors digging through rubble with bare hands to find strangers. Children laughing inside underground shelters. Dazar, Yuyun observed without speaking. These were not anomalies in the usual sense. They were consistent across regions, cultures, languages. The analytical model marked them as irregular behaviors. Yet they appeared again and again. Explain, he requested calmly. The behavioral analyst hesitated. A rare pause. Data contradicts predictive aggression models. Subjects display irrational courage, high rate of self-sacrifice, statistical, willingness to risk extinction in defiant scenarios. Is it instinct? No. It appears intentional, purpose-driven, symbolic action. Sarun considered this. Across the known worlds, intelligent species behaved logically when confronted with overwhelming force. Surrender, retreat, or survival strategies. But Earth's dominant species repeatedly defied that logic. Proceed to observation deployment, he said finally. I want eyes on the surface. Not simulations, not recordings. Real presence, active monitoring. The fleet shifted course gently, angling its sensor cloaks toward Earth's upper atmosphere. Drop pods, disguised as debris or weather anomalies, were prepared. Each carried a Valari observer with mimic skin and neural translators, ready to walk among the humans and return with first-hand accounts. As Sarun turned away from the viewing deck, he paused one final moment to look back at the blue planet. The humans, he thought, had built cities that glowed like stars, launched machines into space, and sang into the darkness long before they knew who might be listening. Strange creatures, he thought. Then he walked away, unaware that for the first time in his long command, he'd underestimated something, and Earth kept turning, completely unaware it was being watched. The first observation pod breached Earth's atmosphere just before sunrise over the eastern edge of North America. Shrouded in a mimic field that bent radar and light, it dropped like a falling leaf, silent and unseen. Inside, Observer Unit 4 designation, Valari name, unspoken, adjusted its bioplasmic shell to match human appearance. Tall, calm, genderless, wrapped in dark clothing modeled on local patterns. Its face bore neutral features, neither warm nor cold. Designed to blend into the background of the human world, it stepped out into the city. Just as the morning traffic began to stir, the humans were loud, not just with voices, but with everything. Noise poured from machines, shoes slapped against concrete, distant horns and songs echoed between buildings. Yet beneath that noise, the Valari detected something stranger, an energy pulsing in the people themselves. Not physical, not thermal. Emotional. They rushed from place to place with little logic, pausing only to share brief smiles or words. Some helped each other with no apparent gain. A man handed his coat to a stranger in the rain. A teenager offered food to a person sleeping in a doorway. A woman chased down a stranger's lost bag and handed it back with nothing but a laugh. The observer sent these impressions back to orbit. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Observer Unit 7 moved through the densely packed streets of Lagos. Here, the flow of human life was even more intense, markets full of color, sound, and movement. Children ran barefoot through puddles, while traders argued with animated hands. At first glance, it looked chaotic, unstructured. But the Valari quickly realized there was rhythm to it. People negotiated space, shared limited resources, solved problems with instinct and speed. Where Valari cities were silent precision, these streets were flexible and alive. One moment stood out. A sudden argument broke out between two drivers whose vehicles had collided. A crowd formed. Voices rose. But then, almost as quickly, others stepped into, elders, a street vendor even, a group of school children watching from across the road. The tension dissolved not by command, but by a collective decision to de-escalate. There was no leader, no instruction. Just a shared, unspoken agreement. The observer recorded the emotional resonance. High stress quickly redirected into calm. The flexibility of reaction fascinated it. Observer Unit 3. Stationed in a hospital in São Paulo, under the guise of a visiting consultant, sent back a different report. The emotional pressure inside the emergency wing was constant. Sirens, pain, fear, shouting, yet the humans worked as a single body. Nurses moved from bed to bed with steady hands. Surgeons worked without pause for hours. When one patient went still beneath the monitors, the team fell quiet, but not for long. There was a brief moment of silence. Then another emergency, another life to save. The pause between grief and action lasted only seconds. The observer had no equivalent behavior in its memory. Valari culture did not experience loss in the same way. They preserved memory, but not emotion. These humans, however, carried both and kept moving forward anyway. By the end of the first day, all 7 observers had returned the same conclusion. Humans operated on logic, but only when it suited them. At all other times, they followed something else. A force without clear shape. Compassion, defiance, hope, rage. Sometimes all at once. Admiral Fruin reviewed the compiled footage in silence. There were no displays of dominance, no centralized power structure worthy of fear. But there was something. Elsan unpredictability. Kind of bravery not born from strength, but from choice. The humans were not fearless. They were afraid, constantly. But they acted anyway. He leaned back in the silence of his command chamber. The observers were correct. Something about this species could not be measured by equations. And far below, the humans kept living. They had no idea they were being watched, or that, in the eyes of their watchers, the world had just become a little more uncertain. High above Earth, aboard the command vessel Vorax Tal, the data streams from the surface continued without pause. Dozens of sensory relays fed images, sounds, and emotional resonance into the cognition chamber, echoing space where light shifted. With thought, the observers' reports, each sent from different regions of the planet, should have followed familiar patterns. But something was wrong. The first sign came when Observer Unit 4's emotional readings returned fragmented. The baseline was clear at first: excitement, curiosity, ambient tension, but then something began to distort the feed. A kind of signal interference, not technological, but cognitive. The readings from its encounter with the city's underground transit system, specifically a moment when a stranger pulled another out of the path of a train, caused a loop in the processing node. The data should have been processed in microseconds. Instead, the system stalled. Technicians reran the logs 3 times. Each time, the loop reoccurred. Moments later, a second report from Unit 3 caused a more serious problem. It had observed a scene in a children's hospital. A terminally ill girl singing to comfort a younger patient during a painful treatment. There was no apparent gain, no survival advantage, just kindness for its own sake. The emotional processor, interpreting the feed, began to overheat. Not from technical failure, but from recursive overload. The AI core paused its analysis and flagged the entry with a rare status code. Non-rational behavior unclassifiable. Admiral Saroon reviewed the raw feed himself. It was simple footage, yet he found it difficult to stop watching. He wasn't sure why. No tactical value, no scientific revelation. Just a human child being kind in the face of loss. Then came the silence. Observer Unit 2, assigned to Delhi, had gone dark. No emergency beacon, no signal. Just an unbroken stillness in the relay channel. Command protocols were followed. A silent sweep of its assigned location showed no signs of damage or capture. The observer had simply stopped transmitting when connection was finally restored several minutes later. The observer's status feed showed it was intact and functional, but its logs were brief and incomplete. No detailed explanation. No full report. Just a short phrase, transmitted without context. They just looked at us, and we knew. Saroon read the message once. Then again, there was no threat in the words. No indication of violence. Yet something in the sentence unsettled him. What did they know? He asked aloud, though no one answered. He called for a neural review of the remaining observers. All were physically stable. None reported interference. But a new trend appeared in their behavioral reports: rising uncertainty. Descriptions grew. Vague patterns were described as fluid, unstable, or even intuitive. The cognition node tried to summarize the situation in a familiar model. But even it hesitated before finalizing its report. Human behavioral sequences diverge from projection. Emotional intensity exceeds expected limits. High variance detected. In ethical logic, subjects demonstrate potential for extreme contradiction. Risk factor, unclear. Saroon sat in silence. Contradiction. That was the heart of it. The humans could be violent and gentle, fearful and brave, destructive and selfless sometimes within the same moment. They shifted between extremes, not as outliers, but as part of their core nature that made them difficult to map, impossible to predict. They had systems of order, but lived through chaos. They had laws, but sometimes broke them to do what they believed was right. They were shaped by logic, but guided by something deeper: meaning, purpose, belief. Sauron found himself standing again at the observation glass, Earth spinning quietly below, so beautiful, so ordinary, and yet it had changed something. A fleet, designed to conquer, had paused, not because of resistance, but because of a feeling. The command hall aboard the Varix Tau remained in near-perfect silence. Around the central core, Valari tacticians and cognition nodes processed endless threads of data. Strategists compiled simulations, tested orbital insertion scenarios, and reviewed civilian compliance probabilities. But something lingered beneath the surface, something that wasn't part of the standard invasion cycle. Admiral Saroon watched the phrase from Observer Unit 2 flash across his personal channel again and again. "They just looked at us. We knew." He had heard strange final transmissions before: panic, defiance, even confusion. But this wasn't a cry for help or a report of contact. It was ... recognition. The words had no clear context, yet they had unnerved everyone who read them. He summoned the complete sensory feed from Unit 2's final hours. The Observer had been stationed in Delhi, operating under the disguise of a university researcher. In its final recorded moment, it stood in a public plaza near a temple entrance. A storm was building. Thunder rolled overhead. Rain fell gently. People gathered to seek shelter beneath a stone archway. A young man noticed the Observer standing in the open rain. He stepped out, said something softly, and extended a hand. Unit 2 hesitated. The rain continued. The man didn't repeat the offer. He simply stood there, letting himself get soaked. The Observer slowly walked away. No further commentary. That was the end of the report. Sar Yuyun closed the file and requested a full council session. It was time to confront the unease that had begun spreading through the upper ranks. Within the hour, the strategic core assembled. Half of the senior staff had begun to question the delays. The logic was clear: had no planetary defenses. Its military systems were regionally isolated. Their space infrastructure was minimal. No unity, no advanced shielding, no coordinated command. They were not ready. Commander Yevkarn, Chief Invasion Planner, made the case clearly. The window is ideal. Civilian response would be scattered. Casualty tolerance is high, even by local standards. Resistance will crumble once orbital control is secured. The longer we wait, the greater the risk of detection. We must act. Others agreed, but Saroon remained motionless. Then he played a collection of surface recordings. First, the aftermath of a city-wide power outage. People forming lines without instruction, sharing food, guarding strangers' homes, organizing without leaders. Next, a clip from an old human documentary, First Responders, running into a burning skyscraper during a collapse. Then a child standing between two shouting adults and whispering something that made them both fall silent. None of these scenes made tactical sense. There was no advantage to these actions. Yet they happened again and again across cultures, languages, and locations. These are not anomalies, Saroon said. They are consistent. They emerge under stress. Without hierarchy, they are irrational, Yevkarn replied. They lack control. Saroon looked directly at him. No, he said. They lack fear. That quieted the room. He gestured. Again, this time opening a feed from Observer Unit 5, stationed in Eastern Europe. It had been recording a street performance musicians playing in freezing weather. No one was paid. No shelter was nearby. People stood in the cold, simply listening. A child danced. Stranger shared tea. There was laughter, even as their breath fogged in the air. It was not strategy that concerned the observers, Sarun continued. It was not their weapons or their numbers. It was how the humans looked at them. They were not surprised, not afraid. They didn't ask what we wanted, they simply looked, and in that look, something passed between them, something we could not answer. He let the words settle. Every species we've encountered has followed one principle when faced with greater power: survival. These humans, ... they choose meaning. They choose defiance, even when it costs them everything. No one spoke far. Below, Earth turned in silence. Its people unaware of the choice being weighed above them. And in that silence, a decision began to take shape. The decision not to act immediately rippled across the Valari fleet like a quiet disturbance in deep water. Subtle, but undeniable. The invasion planners continued their simulations. The weapon bays remained charged, but something had shifted too. Maintain the illusion of momentum. The cognition node redirected resources to cultural signal harvesting, a secondary protocol that involved intercepting planetary media streams, broadcasts, archives, transmissions from satellites, and unshielded networks. It was meant to be a formality, a way to map psychological structures, control mechanisms, propaganda styles. But what the Valari found unsettled them more than any battlefield could have. Thousands of human transmissions poured into the cognition chamber: old films, news broadcasts, music, speeches, recordings of celebrations and funerals, animated stories, documentaries, and debates. The variety was staggering. But what drew the most attention were the fictional material stories told not to record fact, but to express something else. The Valari had no word for fiction. To them, communication was functional. Narrative was utility. But humans crafted entire worlds from imagination, and then passed those stories between generations as if they were real. One film caught the attention of the cognition node, a recording titled Apollo 13. The story followed 3 humans stranded in space, their ship damaged beyond expectation. Systems failed. Oxygen ran low. Every logical model showed no path to survival, and yet, through collaboration, stubbornness, and improvisation, they endured. No superpowers. No miracles. Just belief that failure was not acceptable. Another file, Grave of the Fireflies. A story of 2 children in war. No victory, no glory, just pain. Yet it was told, preserved, and honored. Then came Invictus, Schindler's List, The Martian, and hundreds more. Stories of resilience. Stories of pain turned into meaning. Some were not about survival at all, but about standing for something greater. Even when the ending was defeat, the cognition node, programmed to extract meaning from structure, began to stall. This species idealizes sacrifice, one analyst noted. No, Sarun corrected, watching another scene in silence. They do not idealize it. They understand it. And they choose it again and again. Then came the final anomaly. A low-frequency signal transmitted into space from decades earlier, still floating through the solar system. Not a broadcast, more like a warning wrapped in poetry. It was an old human film titled Apocalypse Now. Its contents were chaotic, war layered over madness, philosophy drowned in horror. Soldiers laughing in smoke and fire, commands questioned. Reality bent, though Valari watched in silence. Then came the scene. A lone soldier, shirtless, fearless, standing before an explosion, speaking calmly about the beauty of destruction. Not to glorify it, but to confront it. To reveal that humans do not only endure the madness of violence, they stare into it and name it. The cognition node shut down for 3 full minutes. When it reactivated, It marked the file with a rare code used only for encounters with unknown cognitive threats. Emotional recursion detected. Predictive logic unstable. Symbolic saturation threshold breached. RUU and turned away from the chamber. They had faced armies. They had shattered planets. They had ended civilizations with surgical efficiency. But they had never encountered a species that turned pain into poetry, turned death into story, and stared back at the void with music in their lungs. Humanity did not just survive. They explained survival. They made it art. The Admiral stood in the quiet of his private chamber and watched Earth. Through the black, not because it was dangerous, but because it was strange. What kind of species sang in the dark? And what would happen if one day someone sang back? The council chamber aboard the Vorax Tal had no seats. Valari did not sit when decisions of consequence were made. Instead, the chamber was constructed in concentric levels, each participant encircled by light fields of tactical data, psychological profiles, and projected outcomes. At the center stood Admiral Saroon, silent as the chamber stirred with thought pulses and disagreement. For 3 cycles, he had delayed the order. For 3 cycles, the fleet had drifted in quiet orbit over the blue planet. The other commanders had waited long enough. Earth matches no known threat signature, said High Strategist Yevkarn. Its populations are fractured. Its military forces are bound by codes and hesitation. Even their nuclear options are unused, held back by fear of mutual destruction. They cling to illusions of diplomacy. Others pulsed agreement. Saroon watched the reaction, but did not yet respond. They lack coordination, Yevkarn continued. They turn their greatest minds toward entertainment. They romanticize struggle and encode emotional nonsense into their memory archives. They are disorganized, inconsistent, and inefficient. And yet, Saroon said quietly, they remain. A pause. He turned to the command stream and summoned visuals. Thousands of small human vessels scattered across decades. Explorers. Machines, crafts barely held together, launched into space with messages written not in code, but in music, photographs, greetings, art. These were sent into the void, he said. Not as warnings, not as claims, as invitations. The room dimmed slightly as another display flickered into being recordings from human emergency efforts. Volunteers in disaster zones, crowds gathering to lift debris by hand, untrained. Citizens organizing rescues before authorities arrived. Saroon continued. They survive not by strength, not by structure, but by a force we do not understand. They survive by accident, Yevkarn countered. That is not a reason to abandon the directive. But even as he spoke, a new report entered the chamber. 3 scout ships, sent to observe remote human regions, had returned unexpectedly, 2 of them damaged, 1 entirely silent. Sensor feeds showed they had landed near active conflict zones, regions in the midst of internal human warfare. The scouts had expected chaos, weakness, easy capture. Instead, they encountered something different. In the footage, 2 opposing human groups previously hostile ceased their fighting when the alien vessels landed. No treaty was signed. No signal passed between them. And yet, without words, they turned their weapons outward, together. No coordination, no shared flag. Just an unspoken choice. Repel the intruder. Then return to their dispute afterward. They paused their war, Saroon said, voice low. Not because they feared us. Because they recognized us as something outside their quarrel. Something other. It was instinct, another commander said. No. Saroon replied. It was priority. The chamber fell into silence. They do not follow patterns, he continued. They do not retreat when logic demands it. They do not advance when opportunity appears. They move for reasons we cannot anticipate. They create unity where there Is none. They destroy what they love to protect something they have never seen. We cannot map this behavior. Another silence. Then someone asked the question all were thinking. Are you saying they are too dangerous to invade? Sarun considered the words carefully. The humans were not powerful. Not yet. But power was not always measured in force. No, he said. At last, I am saying they are not ready to be invaded. We are not ready to understand what it would cost. He let the weight of that statement fall across the chamber. I will issue a formal recommendation to the Hegemony Council. He continued. Earth is to be marked. Red level anomaly. No contact. No interference. No mention in strategic doctrine. And what shall we call them? One voice asked softly. Sar Yuyen watched the blue planet a final time. They call themselves human, he said. And they are more than they appear. There was no ceremony when the order was issued, no formal address, no flourish of banners. Just a single command string. It's quietly transmitted from Admiral Sarun's chamber to every vessel in the Valari fleet. Directive rescinded. Invasion cancelled. Full withdrawal. Do not engage. The message rippled through the systems like a wave of stillness. Weapon bays powered down. Targeting arrays darkened. Insertion vectors were erased from memory. The assault fleets, suspended in high orbit over a world they had studied, measured, and prepared to conquer, began to turn away in perfect silence. The officers did not speak. The command nodes did not question, yet deep inside the fleet, uncertainty lingered. For the first time in generations, the hegemony had encountered a species not through battle, but through hesitation. A species that had forced reconsideration not by resistance, but by presence. By choice. By spirit, and the Valari, who had ended 100 civilizations, had no language for that kind of confrontation. The withdrawal was executed in stages. Observation pods recalled. Camouflage units disengaged. Long-range sensors reoriented toward deep space, but even as they left, some Valari officers lingered at the edge of their viewports, watching the planet below. There were no planetary shields, no orbital cannons, no signs of awareness. The humans had no idea how close they had come. And still, they sang. They worked, they argued, and forgave. Children ran through streets under gray skies. Farmers watched storms roll in across golden fields. Emergency workers pulled strangers from collapsed buildings, and then went home to families who might never hear the stories. They lived, moment by moment, without knowing they had survived a war that never happened. Sarun remained in the central chamber long after the last scout ship had returned. He reviewed the sealed reports again, not for tactics or science, but for feeling. Footage of an old woman baking bread for rescue workers. A boy fixing a broken bicycle for his friend. A teacher staying behind during a flood to ensure every child got out safely. These were not symbols of strength, by Valari standards. But to Sarun, they had become something stronger, a form of resistance no weapon could counter. Behind him, Yevkarn entered without request. The chamber acknowledged him, but did not speak. You've sent the mark to the Hegemony Council, he said. Not a question. Yes. They won't understand. They don't need to. Yevkarn paused, then stepped forward. You could have conquered this world. Your name would have stood with the founders. The history strands would remember. Your campaign for millennia. Sarun turned from the viewport at last. Perhaps. But conquest is not victory if the cost is losing what we came to understand. Yevkarn did not reply. He looked at the blue planet, still spinning below. Do you think they'll ever know we were here? Sarun shook his head. Not today, maybe not ever. But someday, they'll reach beyond that sky. Not to conquer, not to flee, but to wonder. To meet, to ask. He paused, then said quietly, and when they do, I hope we remember how to listen. The silence between them deepened, not heavy, not hostile, just still. Behind them, the Vorax Tau began its slow acceleration out of the solar system. Other ships followed. Within an hour, there would be no sign they had ever been there. No mark left in orbit. No shadow cast across the Earth. Just the memory of a decision. One made in silence, and far below. The humans continued living their days, telling their stories, unaware that the stars had judged them. And stepped back. Years passed. The stars shifted in their endless dance, distant and indifferent. The Volari fleet moved quietly beyond the borders of the solar system, carrying with them memories, questions, and a secret they dared not speak aloud. On Earth, life unfolded in its chaotic, beautiful way. No one noticed the silent retreat of an alien armada hanging just beyond the atmosphere. No one saw the vessels that had watched, waited, and then vanished. But the story somehow found its way into the deep currents. Beneath human perception, it began with whispers in scientific communities, a strange anomaly in sensor data that couldn't be explained. A fleeting flash of unknown signals captured by deep space observatories gone by the time analysis caught up. Dismissed as interference. Forgotten. Then came art. Paintings, poems, songs, and films emerged that echoed feelings beyond their creators' understanding. Themes of unseen watchers, of being known and yet untouched. Of moments when the world paused to catch its breath, as if holding secrets it could not share. Scholars debated. Was it coincidence? Collective imagination? A shared dream? Communities formed around these ideas? Some called it a spiritual awakening. Others named it the silent presence. It became a metaphor for hope and for caution, proof that humanity was not alone. Even if it had never spoken, in time, these ideas spread across borders and cultures, binding people with something new, a shared story larger than any nation or belief. Meanwhile, in the quiet halls of Volari Command, the Admiral's decision was debated once more. Now removed from the immediacy of command, you changed the course of history with hesitation. A young officer said during a rare conversation. Saroon smiled without bitterness. Not hesitation, understanding. Do you think they will rise to meet us one day? The officer asked. Saroon looked toward the stars they had left behind. They already do, he replied. They live through uncertainty and pain with open hearts. They learn not just to survive, but to turn survival into meaning. Meaning. Yes, the greatest power a species can wield is the power to create purpose out of chaos, out of loss, out of fear. The officer nodded slowly. And what if that purpose leads them here? Then we will be ready to listen. Far below, on a small blue planet, children grew up telling stories of invisible friends in the sky. Of strangers who looked but did not harm. Of a quiet moment when everything might have changed, didn't. Humanity did not remember the Volari fleet, but the Volari would never forget humanity, because in that silent, unspoken exchange, the look the Volari saw something they had long forgotten. The courage to be seen, without flinching, and in that, a hope for all worlds.